chemistry lab is an amazing place. It's full of wonderful chemicals and interesting equipment. And one of the most iconic pieces of equipment is the lab burner. They come in different sizes and shapes, and they go by different names, but they all do basically the same thing. To start the burner, you need a spark. You get that from a striker, which is just a piece of flint that drags across a metal bar and makes a spark. One of the most recognizable pieces of lab equipment are beakers. And they come in different shapes and different sizes, but they all do basically the same thing. They hold liquids, and you can do small reactions in them. And one of the most common things you'll do is you'll heat them up with a lab burner. But you can't just hold them over the top of the burner. You're going to need an iron ring stand. But it's still not going to work just right until you add the iron ring. But there's still a problem. The beaker fits inside the iron ring. And to fix that, you need ceramic gauze. It's named after the circular insert that you see here. And when you put it on the iron ring, it spreads the flame out evenly, preventing hot spots. And now your beaker will sit right there. Now, of course, an important safety note is once you've lit the burner, you should consider everything to be hot. Never touch any of this stuff with your hands. And if you need to move the beaker, you should use these beaker tongs. Another piece of lab equipment that everybody recognizes are test tubes, and they come in all different sizes as well. And you can do reactions in them. You can also heat chemicals in them, but if they get hot, you should always use a pair of test tube tongs to hold them. When you're done using the test tubes, you can put them in a test tube rack to save them for the next time. Now, there's all kinds of glassware in the chemistry lab, and there are 3 flasks in particular that you need to know. The first is round in shape, and it's called a Florence flask. The next one is an interesting triangular shape. It fits into your hand so that you can swirl chemicals and mix them. It's named after the man that invented it. It's called an Erlenmeyer flask. And the third one is a much more precise measuring flask. And if you look very closely, there's a line on this flask right there that if you fill it up with liquid and you read the meniscus perfectly, you'll have exactly 1,000 milliliters of volume. This is a volumetric flask. It means volume measuring. But if you want to measure volumes other than 1,000 milliliters, then you're going to need some graduated cylinders. They come in different sizes as well. You should never do a reaction in a graduated cylinder, though. They're only for measuring chemicals. And to measure them correctly, you need to remember that at the top of the liquid level, there'll be a curve. We call that the meniscus. And you read it at eye level from the bottom of the meniscus. When you're done using all this glassware, you need to clean it up. To do that, you'll need brushes. Beaker brush, test tube brush, they come in different sizes to match the different pieces of equipment. But remember, these are brushes, not beaker cleaners. You're the beaker cleaner. This is a beaker brush. Sometimes you might need to superheat a chemical. Get it really hot. To do that, you would need a crucible and lid, or a crucible and cover. This is like a miniature oven, and it will get so hot that it'll glow blaze orange. The chemicals inside then can react or dry out, but of course when it's that hot you would never touch it with your hands. You'd always use a pair of crucible tongs. Now to put them over top of the burner, you could set it on top of the ceramic gauze, but it's not very stable when you do that. It's much safer to use a clay triangle instead. And you put this on the iron ring, then the crucible sits down inside much more securely. If you want to measure liquids even more precisely, then you need one of these. It's called a Buret. And it's basically a fancy graduated cylinder. You put the liquids in the top and you measure them out the bottom. And each one of these little lines is graduated to 1/10 of a milliliter, so you can make very precise measurements. When you're ready to do your reaction, sometimes you need to stir them up. Use a stirring rod or a glass stirring rod with 2 precautions. Number 1, this is not a stick. Sticks are made of wood. And secondly, when you're stirring, don't chop or try to break pieces of chemical up because it's made of glass, it could break and cause injury. Now sometimes you'll have liquid chemicals that you want to dry out. You want to evaporate the water out of them, you would use this. It's an evaporating dish. Now when it's time to remove solid chemicals from their container, use a spatula or a scupula. Now this isn't a grinder upper thingy. That's what it does, but that's not what it is. This is a mortar and pestle. And it does turn chemicals into a powder. And if you need to store those solid chemicals temporarily before you use them, you'll put them in a watch glass. And if you were in cosmetology class, they would call these tweezers. But in the science lab, we call them forceps, and they come in several different sizes. And this has just been an introduction to some of the lab equipment that you'll see in your chemistry class. And as your skills improve, you'll get to use lots of different pieces of equipment.